Well, I got to stay here. I get to choose. Anyone who's not wearing charter outerwear, please. Oh, negative. This is the lecture for ancient and medieval history. Fine, I'll let you keep it on.
Okay, Fahrenheit and Celsius are the same thing right now. That temperature.
This is the ancient medieval history lecture for Monday, the 17th of May, 2021. And we start out with the medieval feudal social order, which is a variant of the social order of any agrarian society from the New Stone Age to the Industrial Revolution. All societies basically follow some variant of this model, but there are some uniquenesses. The biggest thing that's unique about the medieval Western world is that we have a separation into two hierarchies, an ecclesiastical hierarchy of the church and a temporal hierarchy of the state. Now, the church and the state work together, but unlike in the Byzantine Empire, where the emperor is considered a holy guardian of the church, unlike the various Indian empires, where their kings are considered to be the most evolved souls, unlike the Chinese Empire, where the emperor is considered to be the son of heaven, surfing on the surfboard that is the Chinese Empire, orienting it constantly to ever-changing differences in the balance of primal cosmic forces. Unlike the Japanese Empire, where the Empire of Japan is a god as well as a man, lineal descendant of Amaterasu Mikami, goddess of the sun, the emperor is a divine individual in an unbroken line going back to Jimmu Tenno, the first emperor who invaded Japan. Unlike the Aztecs, whose kings are also priests, sacrificing thousands of human hearts in a single holy day. Unlike all of those other groups, and many more I have not chosen to mention, in the West, the church is independent of the state, the church is equivalent to the state, and therefore the church can challenge the state. Now, I understand that you have been miseducated by being born when you were. I was too. I, like you, was born into an American society that prattles on about the separation of church and state without understanding it. Oh my God, we got to preserve the poor state against the evil church. We got to keep society safe from those dastardly Christians and their beliefs about right and wrong. While a very modern belief, that's nutty. Nutty, I tells you. How can you say that? That it's nutty? You're making light of religious intrusion on the state. See, modern Americans reflexively are taught by popular culture, by the broader society, to see religion as a threat to liberty and to see the church and its people, the churches and their peoples, constantly encroaching upon the poor, innocent, whittled government.
Bless you.
Bless you. Aha! Bless you again. And some more. What is silly about this? Who has the army? Who has the police? Who has the armed guys with training and the legal right to use deadly force if necessary? It's not the church. It's the poor whittled government that everyone's afraid is going to get encroached on by the all-powerful evil Christian faith in a moment. No! The separation of church and state, which are words that never appear in our Constitution. It is a concept that our founders were originally willing to override in offering George Washington the leadership of the Church of the United States, a Church of England-style official American church. Washington said heck no to that, along with being king, emperor, or any other permanent type of leader. But the American government offered Washington a leadership of a Church of the United States. The separation of church and state is a concept designed to prevent the government from persecuting religion. It is not designed to keep the government or the society free of religious ideas. When our founders established religious liberty in this country, we are a Christian nation that is tolerant. That's the truth. We're not religiously neutral. We're not anything goes. We are a Christian Protestant nation in the 1780s and 90s that is tolerant of other Protestant groups, including Baptists, that's tolerant of Roman Catholics, that's tolerant of Jews, that is tolerant of a variety of monotheistic believers. We don't have many Muslims at that time. We're not going to be tolerant of pagans, not for a very long time, and we're not going to be tolerant of agnostics or atheists either. But we are a tolerant Christian nation. That tolerance expands, ultimately to include pagans, atheists, and agnostics. But that doesn't mean that the majority of society, which happens to have Judeo-Christian values, should somehow be ashamed of them or hide them or retract them from the public sphere. Far from it. Now, it wasn't until a few years after I was born that people in this country decided to experiment with the notion of genuine religious neutrality. Instead of being a tolerant Judeo-Christian nation, some of us want to make us into a society with no religious preferences of any kind. Oh, that's going to work great. Free people without any common values. What is a culture? A group of people held together by common beliefs. Oh, let's get rid of the common Judeo-Christian values that have held us together for hundreds of years. That's not going to be a problem. Separation of church and state is not about protecting the poor little government. Bless you. It's about protecting people of faith from a government that would hurt them. For example, a government that compels people to pay for abortions when they don't believe in abortion. That's kind of a problem. Or a government that would force people to perform or engage in marriages when they don't believe that they're real marriages. Not that those things would ever happen like they do today. Religious liberty is supposed to mean in our country that the government will not force us to do things that violate our conscience. That's why a pacifist in time of war has the option of being drafted as what's called a conscientious objector. A conscientious objector is a person who is personally a pacifistic being. Many Quakers are pacifists. And a conscientious objector will serve, wear the uniform, take the risks, probably become a medic, which is one of the more dangerous, crazy, dangerous jobs I've ever heard of. Imagine being a medic on a battlefield. You've got to run across the dangerous thing. The enemy's still going to shoot at you. And instead of shooting back, you've got to try to put men together that have just been taken apart by the latest and greatest modern weapons. But that's a morally defensible thing. You're not taking lives. You're sharing the risks of your fellow countrymen, but you're not being forced to take a life. Separation of church and state is designed to protect people of faith, of all kinds of faiths, from government intrusion. Now, there are limits. We won't accept human sacrifice. We won't accept massive drug use. We won't accept cannibalism. We won't accept incest. We don't even accept bigamy or polygamy or polyandry, which is the marriage between multiple partners. We have, within the last 20 years, moved to a point where we'll accept the marriage between two men or two women. You can think what you want about that. It's progress. So there are limits on religious freedom. But the idea of the separation of church and state is about protecting people of faith from a government that might intrude upon that faith and demand that they do things against their will. This all comes from the Middle Ages. Because the Pope is independent. Oh, I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
Okay, so what about those like old guys that like give out the orange Bibles like once a year at charter? What's that whole thing about?
I think they're the Gideons. Gideons are a non-denominational charitable organization that give Bibles away. The Gideons also make sure that Bibles are in most hotel and motel rooms across the country. Their belief is that by providing people with the Word of God, they will help people who may be in need, who may be in a moment of moral confusion, because there'll be a Bible nearby that might help them get centered. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because that happens a lot at the school, and you cannot escape the Bible.
Well, why would you want to?
I don't know, to
But
get
no,
to
no.
your class.
Well,
Avoiding human interaction.
if you still had Mr. Prosier, or Dr. Prosier, if he was still an English teacher here, you would be reading extensive sections of the Bible as literature. As it is, I teach extensively about religion. But no, you're not going to avoid it.
Yeah,
Why?
I
Western
mean,
Civ.
like having to like receive one when there's always the chance that you're just not interested in taking
Well,
one.
then
Or
you
can
say
definitely
no.
you can say no.
You can
thank
say no,
you,
thank
know?
you. You don't have to accept it. It's not like accept the Bible and the love of our Lord Jesus Christ. No, die, heathen! No, they're not going to do that. They're not going to do that. Just say no if you're not interested. Say, I'm sorry, my Bible is purple. I don't want an orange Bible, or whatever. And that's funny, actually, because orange is a holy color to Buddhists. Buddhist monks tend to wear saffron-colored and orange-colored robes. Do you have anything else, or?
No, I just sometimes found it a bit annoying.
Well, just don't accept it. That's fine.
Personally.
Yeah, I get it. It's freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. So, this is important for this reason. In all of those other societies, the king or the emperor can do whatever he wants. And the church will back him because he's holy, or he has some kind of sacerdotal holy office. But not in the Europe, not in the West. If kings go off message, kings who have sworn in their coronation oath to rule in a Christian fashion, if they go off message, the Pope can chastise them, can punish them. And if the king refuses to accept correction, can excommunicate them. Excommunication is when the church kicks you out and says you are no longer able to participate in Christianity. You will have to petition us in order to return to the faith, to be allowed to return to the faith. Now, think about this. Why are people honor bound to obey their kings in the Middle Ages? Does anyone have an answer?
Yeah? Because they supposedly speak from God.
On the nose. I mean, one reason, the king has the army. You don't mess with the king, true. Otherwise you get the chop. But the king is put there by God. Divine right of kings. God says, Jobo, you become king. Otherwise, Jobo would never have become king. Self-fulfilling prophecy. But what if Jobo is excommunicated? What does that mean to the loyalty and obedience of the entire kingdom?
His legitimacy has been ruined.
That's right. And without the moral right to rule, he can't rule. Excellent. Without being a member of the church, no king can rule for long. The church is able to treat with the most powerful nobleman in Europe, the Holy Roman Emperor, on equal terms. The Pope and the Emperor. Neither is superior or inferior. Both claim superiority. Neither achieve it. This separation of church and state, by having a competitive, independent church, keeps the state from going crazy. If a leader becomes bloodthirsty and loves killing his own people, the church will intervene. If a king refuses to allow people to hear the word of God and hear other opinions in churches, the church will intervene. This is the only society on earth Western Christian civilization in the Middle Ages that has an independent organization that is as powerful or more powerful than any king. The Church claims responsibility for all the faithful. The Pope claims a universal mission to be the vicar of Christ to all Christian believers wherever they are. That's a universal mission, no limits. The king, on the other hand, claims superiority of authority within a certain area. God made me supreme in England or France or Belgium or whatever, Burgundy. So whose cuisine reigns supreme? Whose authority is supreme? Is it the church's universal authority because they're overall Christians? Or is it the king's authority over everyone in this area? And the truth is that they go back and forth over this. Sometimes in a particular place, the church seems to be stronger. Sometimes in another place, the state seems to be stronger. But the very fact that there's a church and a state in competition with one another is going to be very good for us. I hope that you come from families that are harmonious, where there aren't many arguments. There are always arguments because we're human beings. But I hope that you come from a family that doesn't. However, if you have two parents that are on the downside of a marriage heading for divorce, as horribly bad as that is, I come from a family that was divorced. If all you care about is stuff, you can clean up. Because at different times, each parent is going to want to feel your support against the other one. It's not their best feature. It's not their best moment. It's a sign of weakness and it's a sign of trauma. Because divorce is hell in many ways, in many cases, not in all. So mom may promise you favors or presents, or dad may promise you favors or presents, and then they're going to one-up one another, and you can, clean up. It's not as good as having a family that's intact, but you get more toys, you get more gear, you get more gaming stuff, whatever. Because the church and state are in competition with one another for the fidelity and loyalty of the European peoples, there are times when the church will give thanks to the people. And there are times when the kings will give thanks to the people that they never would have given if they weren't in competition with one another. The liberty that we have, in part, comes from the competition between church and state. The limits on government that we believe in come largely from the limits placed on the state by the church in the Middle Ages. In other words, without the Western Christian Church, aka the Roman Catholic Church, we would not have developed the ideas of freedom that we have. For 1,000 years, that church stood as the only thing preventing kings from playing God. The church insisted that kings rule under God. That's a big difference. No one else in the world had that protection of these two groups. The emperor and kings versus the pope and the cardinals. The nobles, the barons, counts, dukes versus the bishops and archbishops. The warriors and the priests, monks, and nuns. The townsmen and the church elders and deacons. And then below that, this is the other great characteristic of agrarian society. Most people are needed to grow food. If you don't have, and most people, 70 to 95%, depending upon where you and when you are, if you don't have 70 to 95% of your people growing food, everyone starves. That's not a happy. So, how do you keep most of your people on the land? Well, in the Middle Ages in Europe, there are 3 different groups of people bound to the land. Can't leave it without permission. Peasants, serfs, and slaves. We'll start out with the best group. Peasants are half free, half slave. Peasants can own property, they can have money, they can have people working for them. A successful peasant will spend some of his time working in the Lord's fields and some of his time working in his own fields. A peasant can actually have a pretty decent standard of living. And a peasant might even be able, under certain circumstances, get their children out of the peasantry into a different line of work. Peasants have it the best of all. But peasants are not allowed to leave the land without their lord's permission. And they have to farm. That's their job. Their job is to grow food. But as farmers go, peasants have it the best because they can accrue money, and in accruing money, they can have a more comfortable lifestyle, and that more comfortable lifestyle might provide opportunities for some of the children to get out of that. That's the peasantry. If you had to be a person on the land, you hoped you were a peasant. The second group is serfs. What sorts of things come with a luxury car these days? What sorts of features? If you have a luxury car or you know somebody who has one, what are some of the things that the car comes with? All right.
Self-driving maybe?
Self-driving, which, by the way, scares the living hell out of me. I don't believe in self-driving cars because sooner or later, some wise person's going to say, well, if all the cars were self-driving, then they'd all make sense. There'd never be any accidents. What we got to do is get rid of people-driven cars. I like driving. Driving is fun. Driving is also something I don't trust machines to do. I want pilots piloting my planes. I want locomotives driven by engineers. And I want drivers behind the cars around me. Hopefully not texting. But yeah, self-driving could come. What else? What are some of the other things? Yes?
Flappy doors.
Flappy doors. Oh, like the gold wing doors? Yeah. Hope, by the way, that you never have to ditch out of your car when it's going fast. I guess those doors are better than some. Back in the old days, they used to have doors that if I'm facing forward, like the front of the car, they'd open like this. They were called suicide doors because literally you could not jump out of them without the door hitting you. So you got to get out of the car, and the door is like this, and the car's going this way. What are you going to do? Because if you get out, you get smashed by the door. These gull doors, what cars have those? They're cool.
Like Teslas.
Okay,
Yeah.
Teslas have them. DeLoreans used to have them. DeLorean's the car they used in the Back to the Future movies. Besides gull doors and self-driving features, I can think of a few. Can any of you think of any more features?
I'm not exactly sure what it's. Yeah. I'm not exactly sure what it's called. But it's a thing where it has all the different features, like you can call someone or.
Oh yeah,
send a
full
message or-
online electronics.
Yeah, those things, and also those things that have the camera in the back, so you can just.
Ah, yes. So you have a reverse cam. I admit, when I have rental cars from time to time, when I go back east, I kind of enjoy having the camera there to look directly behind me where I can't see.
Yeah, that's a nice feature.
That is a nice feature.
I was going to say like the Bluetooth technology.
Yeah. Okay. Back in the old days, when I was younger than you, they used to market luxury cars. It comes with leather bucket seats. And that was supposed to be a good thing, even though in the heat, you don't want to be on a leather seat in the summer. God, it hurts. Even if you're wearing shorts. Air conditioning was a feature that came only on luxury cars. AM/FM radio with an 8-track player or a cassette, and eventually a CD player came with. All of these things came with the luxury car. Well, a serf is like that. Serfs come with the land. If you buy 20 acres of land and there are 8 serfs living on it, the serfs are now yours to command. Serfs are slaves with these benefits. They're slaves with benefits. Okay, what they are, the benefits are these. A serf cannot be sold away from their family. A serf cannot be sold off the land. Serfs come with the land. If you buy a few square miles, every tree, every rock, every brook, every stream, every lake is part of what you're buying. That's assumed. If there are minerals found under your land, you have rights to them. That's assumed. If there are serfs living on it, the serfs are yours. That's assumed. So serfs are the labor force that come with the land, and they breed themselves. Serfs, like peasants, they get married, they have children. You can tell a serf what to do. You can force a serf to do anything you want it to do, except leave. The serf stays on the land.
Does the presence of a serf increase the property value?
Of course it does, because you've got a built-in labor force. Definitely. So that leaves the slaves. Yeah.
Okay, so how did they get there in the first place? Can you employ serfs?
Oh, well, no. They got there in the first place because they were the former Roman population taken over by the
And
Germans.
then they got taken over.
And then basically they lost status and became serfs.
Okay.
It happened over hundreds of years of time. They weren't considered fully real people because they didn't have the rights of fully real people. Serfs come with the land, but you can tell them to do whatever you want and they have to do that. Slaves are human tools, legally, morally. In a Christian society, they have some ability to go to church and stuff, but slaves can be sold. If you're a mom and you just have a baby, the baby can be sold away from you just after it's born. If you're a husband, you've got a wife, the husband and wife can be sold apart from one another. Yes?
So you said, like, serfs, they have children and all that, but if serfs can't leave the land, do they just have that with, like, new slaves, or is it just incest?
New slaves, mostly. New slaves, people coming through. You have a point, though. Sometimes what people will do is they'll arrange for community events. And it's not exactly breeding centers, but people do hook up. Yeah. It's in reality, the incest factor is not so great. It does exist. You have some old European valleys where everyone's been related to everyone for a very long time. But usually there's some new blood coming in. The really bad places for those are the Pacific Islands, oddly enough, because they're so geographically separated from everything else. This is why on Tahiti, sailors... Did you ever hear about Tahiti? Okay, Tahiti is in French Polynesia, and it was the place that in the 1800s and 1700s sailors wanted to go. And here's why. A, the Tahitians were not cannibals. But B, the Tahitians had a custom, and it's to keep their blood from getting too stale, too incestuous. Whenever men show up, the young women, whether married or mothers or whatever, will go out and they will sleep with the sailors. And the goal is to bring new blood in. They still love their husbands. Their husbands are not usually thrilled about it, but it's a cultural thing to keep the people healthy. Does that make sense? But in Europe, I don't think it was that bad a problem. I think that people found ways. And I also think sometimes the land was sold, so now you're on a different piece of land with different serfs. You can interact in different ways. I guess. That's a good question. I do not know the whole answer to it. Slaves, you can do anything you want with them within Christian reason. Now, who were the slaves of Europe? Well, I'll tell you, they weren't field hands from Africa. The slaves tended to be people from Poland and Russia and Eastern Europe in general. The Slavs of Eastern Europe tended to be slaves.
I'm presuming and hoping that the Polynesian custom is not still on today.
Not to my knowledge, which is why Tahiti is not the place where everyone goes. The icky travelers go to Bangkok, Thailand, and they go to Amsterdam, Holland. They do not, to my knowledge, still go to Tahiti. So, yeah, I think as Tahitians were Christianized, that was stopped. But it is an existential problem. It's a threat. If you're in this geographically isolated area, eventually everyone's going to be related, and that's going to be a problem in terms of genetics, in terms of health. Okay, so peasants, serfs, and slaves are needed. And they needed to be kept on the land. Peasants are required to be on the land without their lord's permission. They can't leave. Serfs come with the land. Slaves are property. But don't think of slavery like in the American South with the cotton growing and the tobacco growing and the black African slaves. That's not. European slavery in the Middle Ages tended to be much more humane because the slaves and the slave owners looked the same. They ended up speaking the same languages. There wasn't this gulf that race seemed to create. And therefore, while slavery was never easy or nice, it was easier and nicer than the kind of racial chattel slavery that happened in the 17 and 1800s. Make sense? Okay. Now, we are leaving this, and we're going to look at England approaching and during the time of the mythical Robin Hood. Because starting tomorrow, you're going to see a movie.
Disney's Robin Hood?
No, it's Robin and Marian, which is one of the best. It's not Robin Hood Men in Tights. No, it's not. Okay, so let's see. Where are we? Case study England in the time of Robin Hood. Okay, so the Normans have ruled England since 1066. It's now the 1200s or so, the 11 or 1200s. And the ruling family is called Plantagenet. Plantagenet, there's a name. I'll spell it out for you. Plantagenet. Plantagenet. So French. P-L-A-N-T, plant. Ag, A-D, A-G, Enet, E-N-E-T. The Plantagenets were the ruling family of England, and they were very Norman. They spoke Norman French. Henry II, Plantagenet, was a very, very, very powerful king. I'm going to start out with Henry II. So that's before Richard Lionheart. Henry invaded Scotland. Henry quarreled with the church. Henry grew up with a guy named Thomas Beckett. He and Beckett were pals. When they went out looking for the pretty young ladies, they went out together. They were best of friends. When Henry becomes king, he has a trouble with the church. The church does not let its people get tried in royal courts. They insist that all priests, monks, and nuns be tried in ecclesiastical courts. The church claims independence from royal authority on church lands. The church does not pay the king taxes. And the church's pope, not the king, chooses the church leaders in England. At least has an influence on them. So this all creates tension with the English king. Henry II marries one of the most powerful women in the Middle Ages. Her name is Eleanor of Aquitaine. Eleanor of Aquitaine, this is going to seem weird, it comes from the family that rules the Aquitaine, which is basically the southwestern quarter of France. Her family controls a quarter of France. Eleanor of Aquitaine had been the wife of the King of France, and then died. So, Eleanor of Aquitaine becomes wife of the King of England. And she has so much land, and she is so strong-willed, that basically it's a real partnership. The King of France and the King of England have to put up with a wife who has her own mind about everything. Henry and Eleanor. Oh, Beckett. Henry is frustrated with the church. The Archbishop of Canterbury dies. Henry has an opportunity to appoint one before the Pope and others get involved. Instead of appointing one of the priests, Henry appoints his friend, Thomas Beckett. His friend is going to be the Archbishop of Canterbury. Henry II's friend is going to have his back and be loyal to the king, not the church. That's what Henry hopes. Beckett says, "Don't make me this." Henry says, "I can't think of a better person. You're my best bud. Come on, we still go out with the women all day. We'll probably have to stop doing that because you're going to have to be a priest and all. But we're still friends. I'm appointing my best friend. You're going to do great." Well, the moment Beckett looked closely at the church, his attitude changed. He was no longer the king's friend. He was the Archbishop of Canterbury. He was no longer the buddy of the king. He was the chief churchman in all of England. Because Beckett would not delude himself, Beckett began to oppose the king. The king can't believe it. do I have to do? This is my best friend. And he's causing trouble. He's interfering. He's getting in the way of my decisions. He's arguing. What? So one night, Henry II is deep in his cups. That's an old-fashioned way of saying he's a bit drunk. And he's eating and drinking with a couple of knights newly returned from the Crusades. And in the midst of this, he's complaining about Beckett. And finally, Henry says, "Who will rid me of this turbulent priest?" And passes out. Well, the Crusader Knights, freshly back from the Crusades, drunken in rage, decide, yeah, we will. We will. We will. So they get on their horses and they ride to Canterbury. They break into the Archbishop's residence and they kill him. The next morning, Henry wakes up with a headache. Oh, God. Oh, that was a lot of booze. What happened? Well, the guys you were eating dinner with just killed the Archbishop of Canterbury. What? Oh, this is bad. You can argue with the Archbishop all you want. When you start killing him, the Pope is going to excommunicate you unless you do something right quick about it. So Henry... Henry takes responsibility. He apologizes to the church. He gives the church a bunch of extra privileges, a bunch of money. And once a year, he will go to Canterbury, be stripped down to the waist, on his knees, and he will be whipped by church monks to make him pay for his words. The church accepts that he was drunk and he didn't really mean it. That the Crusader Knights listened to what he said, "Who will rid me of this turbulent priest?" and killed the Archbishop without Henry's genuine intention. But Henry did get drunk. He did say it. As a result, every year for the rest of his life, Henry goes to Canterbury and humiliates himself in front of the church. The murder of Archbishop Thomas of Beckett, who later becomes Saint Thomas of Beckett, is still something talked about in England today. So, if you have problems with your priests, don't kill them. It'll work out much worse for you than if you just find ways to outfox them, to outsmart them. Henry and Eleanor have several children, 3 of which are important. Well, actually 2 of which are important. The eldest that survives is Richard Lionheart. Richard Coeur de Lion. Richard Coeur de Lion, Richard Lionheart, is a warrior's warrior, a man's man, reputedly a homosexual, and when he becomes king, joins the King's Crusade to the Holy Land. He leaves England with some of his most loyal knights, and he's going to join the other kings of Europe. I'll tell you about the Crusades later, but he's going to go to the Holy Land, to the Middle East, and fight. And unlike most Christian leaders, Richard is a good general. So there's this moment in the Crusades where Richard Lionheart is teamed up against Saladin, a Kurdish general. And year after year, these 2 generals fight and fox each other, and it's a real battle of equals. It's like a boxing match between 2 top-weight heavyweight fighters, or 2 UFC champions that really know what they're doing. These 2 generals fight and fight and fight. Ultimately, Richard realizes it's done, and he leaves, and he tries to go home. He is captured and held for ransom by the Holy Roman Emperor. He's coming back from Crusade. The Holy Roman Emperor sees an opportunity, captures him, holds him in the castle for ransom. Who does he ask for ransom? The guy Richard Lionheart leaves in charge of England, his younger brother John. Now, John is one of these unfortunate personalities that grows up basically a guy who messes up all over the place and who has 0 charisma. This is how history remembers him. There's a wonderful play that I've been trying to get Ms. Fleming to do for a drama called The Lion in Winter. It has some incredible sharp dialogue, and it's between Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine and Richard Lionheart and John, all getting together with the rest of their family at a castle just before Henry's going to die. And these guys, the way they scheme against one another is just wonderful to watch. And there's a moment in the play where John is to have said, and this is rooted in history, we believe John said, "I am so unlikable that if I were on fire, no one would even so much as piss on me to put me out." Now that's unlikable. That's unlikable. If nobody's going to even do a Gulliver for you. So John is in charge while Richard is away. John does not want to pay the ransom because John's acting like king. Ultimately, Richard is freed, John is humiliated, and Richard becomes king in England, and then, well, he goes back to France and dies. John becomes king for real. And John, his dislikability is going to cost him. He ends up wanting to be friends with a group of cronies, yes men, who act like they like him. They're fake friends. And he likes giving them money and favors and privileges and preferences in order for them to keep being his friend. He's not very secure in himself. Plus, he thinks these people will help him rule. So, John, after Richard's death, ends up coming into open conflict with the Pope, just like his father Henry. But he doesn't apologize. He wants control over the church in England. At the same time, John is facing war from the Scots in the north and from the French in France because of the English territories in France. John has to raise money for a war with the French king. But that's not all. To pay for all this, John has to increase taxes on everybody. And so John increases taxes on everybody, particularly the common people and the barons. The barons of England are the nobles, the descendants of King William the Conqueror's knights. The barons don't like being overtaxed by a king who doesn't care about England and who's just going to use their money to try to conquer more of France, and who also continues to have problems with the church, many of whom they are loyal to. And the people of England, how can you pay taxes when you're starving to death? How can you pay taxes when what is demanded in taxes is more than you can afford to pay? How can you pay taxes when the taxes are literally causing you to be destroyed month after month, year after year? Now, it would have been okay if John had had these conflicts one at a time. You fight the people, overtax them. You fight your barons after you're done with the people. Then you get done with the barons. Then you fight the church. Then you fight the king of France. Doing it one at a time would have worked. But John makes enemies of all these groups simultaneously. And he is suddenly in a position where he'd better make up with one group or he's going to get overthrown. He's already excommunicated. The church casts him out. That's interfering with his legitimacy. Banditry and brigandage is taken up in the land. This is where the legend of Robin Hood comes from. Who to appease? Who do I need? John asks himself. More than anyone else, who do I need? I need the barons. If the barons aren't happy, they're going to raise civil war against me. If they raise civil war against me, I'm dead. I can't do that. Forget about the Pope. The people can go hang. The French king, he can wait. Scots can wait. I'm going to give the barons something that they want. In return, hopefully they'll have loyalty for me. So on June 15th, the year 1215, at a place called Runnymede, which was sort of a wet field, King John meets with the barons. And they bring before him Magna Carta, the Great Charter. And in Magna Carta, the king has to agree to give up certain powers. For example, even the king, Magna Carta said, is under the law. Now, up until this point, the king could make laws for everybody else, bless you, but he was not accountable for obeying them. The king was above the law so that he could be some sort of justicar. In other words, I don't have to worry about the law, so I can do justice. Like Batman, like a vigilante. Bless you. Tissues over there if you need them. The king is above the law, so he need not worry about the law. Well, in Magna Carta, King John has to sign, I too, even though I am king, am subject to the laws of England. This is so important. If the king's above the law, he can do anything he wants. If the king is under the law, your rights are protected. Your rights to property and other things. England becomes a hub of business, which is going to make it very wealthy. And the root of that business is in Magna Carta. If the king is under the law, he can't just claim your invention. Let's say you invent the edible whistle, and it suddenly becomes really, really big, like a chitty chitty bang. That's what I was thinking. Well, in France, the king can claim the edible whistle as his own, and you, the inventor, get diddly. You get nothing, unless the king of France wants to give you a gift for, as he steals your property, your invention. But in England, if you invent the edible whistle, they will not, no one, not the king, not the government, will be able to take that away from you without due process of law. So even the king is under the law is a huge deal. The second thing is the king is also required to ask for new monies. Ask the barons, later parliament, and the barons in parliament may say no. So the king can't just say, I demand 25% more in taxes this year. No. The king has to ask the barons, and the barons may say no. Magna Carta is a part of the heritage of the U.S. Constitution, and that's where we'll leave things for tomorrow. Any questions? I see none. So, you may talk quietly among yourselves until this is. Thank you. Come again.